Your view seems to be that even if we could save American lives by detaining more terrorists, it would be better to kill them with a drone or let them go free rather than detain them.
I respectfully disagree, Senator. I never believe it's better to kill a terrorist than to detain him.
How many high-value targets have been arrested and detained, interrogated by the United States during your 4 years with the administration?
I'll be happy to get that information to you, Senator.
I submit to you the answer to that is 1.
President Obama's pick for CIA Director John Brennan faced some tough questions this week on the drone war. Let's talk about that on our roundtable right now. ABC News Chief Global Affairs Correspondent Martha Raddatz replacing Jonathan Karl right now because, of course, you spent so much time on this issue. And the drone war really has become kind of the signature characteristic of President Obama and the war on terror. Dramatic expansion over the last 4 years. But this is the most scrutiny it's ever gotten.
Well, that's certainly because of the testimony of John Brennan and what he brought to the Hill, what he talked about, which, frankly, wasn't very much. The drone wars have not been discussed for 4 or 5 years. No one talks about them. It's a brilliant strategy. If you don't talk about it, no one else will talk about them either. I just returned from the Mideast. I was in Israel. I was in northern Israel. A lot of people are talking about drones. A lot of people are talking about the effects of drones, George. As you know, I've been in all the places they're used, in Yemen, Pakistan, and people there do not like them. John Brennan is able to say, look, it's very effective, and it's certainly been effective taking out core leadership. But when you talk to people on the street, you wonder what the long-term strategy is.
Well, let me press you on that, though, because you're right. There has been a lot of discomfort on the ground with these drone strikes. On the other hand, it does appear that the number of civilian casualties has been going down since 2008, and certainly there are less casualties than would be caused by massive bombing.
Well, I think one of the things is that, yes, I think they become much more careful. I think John Brennan is probably very careful. No one wants to kill civilians. And yet, the American public doesn't really know much about this. I interviewed Stan McChrystal a few weeks ago, the former head of the Joint Special Operations Command, who ran a drone strike program. What General McChrystal said is, look, what concerns him is that they're now going after mid-level al-Qaeda. They're now going after mid-level Taliban. So where does that stop? And who makes those decisions? And who makes the decisions that something is imminent?
And Congressman Ellison, you've been on this for some time. You want much more oversight from the Congress.
That's right. You know, I've looked into this. I haven't found one public hearing on drones. Now, we had the Brennan hearings, but, you know, the Congress has an oversight responsibility here. And by the way, the president has invited the conversation. He said we need a legal architecture around this thing. So why don't we go do it? I, by the way, don't think this is a partisan issue at all. I think that we need to get a hold of this technology because certainly other countries will be weaponizing drones. Certainly we will probably have objections to how they use them if they don't use them according to due process and international standards. And by the way, the paper that the president, the administration released, you know, uses the term imminent threat. But this
and who decides that, right?
Well, this is the broadest use of the term imminent I've ever heard.
It's a member of al-Qaeda, basically.
You know, if you're a member of al-Qaeda, but not even that. If you were in affiliated groups. So it could be pretty attenuated. I'm glad the president invited the conversation. I think we ought to take him up on it and have to put some real structure around this.
And Congressman, this, as he said, this has been somewhat bipartisan. A lot of Republicans also.
Let me first say how impressed I am. My gosh, the guy's got the material even in his pocket.
Right here.
This is a serious congressman.
And read it. See the yellow?
It has been bipartisan. It's a policy that started under President Bush, continued and expanded under President Obama. I, like everybody else, I actually think the hearings and discussion have been very helpful. There probably needs to be more of it. The two things that come out of it that concern me the most, frankly, I think, and this is not a criticism of the president, I think he's probably been more directly involved in some of the targeting decisions than, if I were his advisor, I would think would be wise. I think he should supervise the program. He needs to be intimately familiar.
Like Lyndon Johnson picking targets.
Yeah. I think he's taken on too much risk for himself, quite frankly. But again, that actually says good things about the president, not bad things. The second thing is, and this is to Senator Chambliss' point, I really do think we are losing a lot of opportunities out there to actually extract people and get information. And human intelligence is really much more important than taking out individual targets.
And Nicolle, one of the ironies that a lot of people have sensed here is that even though President Obama may have modified Bush administration policies, he's also continuing them.
Yeah, and it's slightly hilarious that people have all this patience for a legal architecture to be crafted after the fact. If this had been President George W. Bush's administration revealing that this many drone attacks are going on, there would be impeachment hearings underway. So the hypocrisy sort of has Republicans steaming, but I think the actual policy and the fact that President Obama has continued almost the entire basket, and in the case of drone killings, greatly accelerated their use, has Republicans feeling pretty satisfied that the counterterrorism policies put in place by the Bush administration, which Dick Cheney was the architect of many of them, have been continued by this president. And it's a very interesting other side of the coin to this extremely progressive president on domestic policy.
And Stephanie, it does seem as if the president is uncomfortable, at least with one strain of the criticism, that he's not being as transparent as he promised to be.
Well, look, this is sensitive information. There is oversight through the intelligence committees, which is the way the law is currently set up. He has made it clear that he's open for a discussion about how these programs are handled in the future. You know, the document that you're holding up is based on a legal architecture, but Mr. Brennan, the president, the administration has said that they want transparency, accountability, and a process to ensure that there's, everybody's aware of what we're doing going forward. There are elements of the President Bush's war on terror that haven't been continued, many forms of torture. And, the fact that the president just put this memo out after it became known, and, he wants to work with Congress and be open and transparent.
Another revelation this week in the foreign policy area, pretty remarkable hearing. Secretary of Defense, outgoing Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta, conceding that there had been a real internal debate and that most of the president's national security advisors actually wanted him to arm the rebels in Syria.
Did you support the recommendation by then Secretary of State Clinton and then head of CIA General Petraeus that we provide weapons to the resistance in Syria? Did you support that?
We did.
You did support that?
We did.
You were in that region this week, Martha Raddatz, and it was pretty surprising to learn that not only Secretary of Panetta, but also Secretary of State Clinton had pushed for this. The president said no.
And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So he had military also saying we should arm the rebels. I think that came as a complete surprise to many people in the region, and I talked to a lot of officials in the region about this. I don't think they're convinced that if the rebels were armed, this would have changed much. A lot of the people I talked to said, look, we didn't know who they were then. And there was actually some disagreement in the military, the rebels. We just don't know who they are. We really shouldn't have been giving them guns, people I talked to. And yet, when you think about it, the United States really could have had someone to deal with in there. And that's probably the argument that Panetta would make, that General Dempsey would make, that Hillary Clinton would make. You had somebody there.
Well, let me tell you, you got nearly 800,000 displaced people. According to the UN, you got more than 60,000 people dead. If you talk to Syrian Americans, you have maybe many, many more than that. We've got to do something. I'm even hearing reports that we're not even coming up to the plate on humanitarian assistance. I mean, you've
got chemical weapons, which is the most frightening.
That's a seriously complicating factor. But I just think that, we've got to do more than we're doing. Now, armed rebels or not, this is a fact-based issue. I think we could be doing a whole lot more, and I'd like to see it.
Senator McCain was saying that as well.
Well, I tell you what, I want to give the president some support here, actually. This is real presidential leadership. When you turn away from the advice of your very top leaders, that's a presidential level decision. He deserves a lot of respect, and it's a tough call either way. On the arms issue, I am very uncomfortable. I actually agree with the president. We don't know enough to be interjecting arms. There's plenty of people sending arms. The rebels haven't been short of arms. So I don't know that we need to take the lead. On the other hand, I agree very much with what Keith said. We do need to be on the ground with humanitarian aid. We need to have political intelligence. We can provide a lot of communications and logistics, that kind of stuff that keeps us in the game. But arming people who may be the very ones that take the chemical weapons and misuse them, that would have been a disaster for us, too. So I think the president's been, frankly, appropriately cautious.
And, Stephanie, how would you respond, though, to people who say that this was interesting timing, that the president chose to say no to his entire national security team right in the middle of the campaign, just didn't want that trouble in the middle of the campaign?
Well, look, George, I think that there are decisions made with the national security team all the time. Sometimes the president agrees with the national security advisor, sometimes he doesn't. That's why the president has built the team that he has. And, you know, I only know about this from what I read. I'm not inside the White House anymore. And my understanding is that Panetta and others didn't push for it because of the risks involved that the congressman just laid out, that because these arms could end up in the hands of al-Qaeda or they could be used against Israel. So this is why administrations are set up. This is why national security teams have been built. This is why the president wanted such strong personalities and expertise on his national security team. Doesn't always agree with them, but he gets their best advice and then he makes the decision. He's the commander-in-chief. You know,
just two quick political points. I think if you look at where President Obama's foreign policy is likely to crack wide open among partisan lines, this is it. This you will see Senators McCain, I think, and Graham and others start to string together instances of America leading from behind and of this president's comfort in doing so in places like Libya and now in Syria. And I think this will become the most political part of the president's foreign policy.
We see scrambling of party lines over here.
Right. But I think this is where he's opening himself up to criticism of what was a historically strong America, a strong role for America in the world, is being deteriorated by decisions like this. And I think that, like I said, the counterterror policies are pretty much in line with what Bush and Cheney advocated. It's his foreign policy in this very complicated, very fragile region where I think, and again, you know, you're going to see people partying with their own party, but I think Senators McCain and Graham and Chambliss and others are going to open up a line of attack.
In a region that is changing rapidly, the United States needs to be seen to be on the side of people who are fighting for liberation, for democracy. And by the way, is the world really going to miss Bashar al-Assad? I mean, it'd be great if he was gone. And
something has to happen this year. I mean, that's the sense I got over there. Something has to happen. Either he is gone or it's fragmented completely. People are so nervous over there in that region. I traveled to northern Israel in the Iron Dome, which is the missile intercept, that they're so nervous that Syria or Lebanon, more likely Lebanon, Hezbollah, will start launching missiles towards Israel, that they've got these interceptors set up all over the northern border. And those chemical weapons, if I can just say, those chemical weapons, I was told, are now all consolidated in certain areas. They believe it was Assad and the Syrian regime who helped Hezbollah try to get those weapons out of there.
In certain areas and Israel knows where they are, should we expect another strike from Israel?
I think you very well will see another strike. If they do anything with those weapons, they said it's easier to take them out, and it's not easy to take out chemical weapons than to send people in to safeguard them because it would take so many people.
Again, remember, we were involved in Libya, and weapons got out of Libya, and we're dealing with them in Mali and other places now. At least those weren't American weapons, but we helped destabilize the country. We've released them through the region. We ought to be pretty careful here. I couldn't agree more with you about Assad. I really couldn't. But again, I don't sense there's a lack of weapons in the region. And the rebels seem pretty well armed. Well, again, we agree on that. But here, be careful. And there are times when you do break with your advisors. Frankly, President Bush broke on the surge with almost all his advisors. I think he was right to do that. The president here, I think, is running risk. Now, the political risk is he owns it. I mean, you can't point to anybody else. I made this decision above people. That speaks well to him. I hope history bears
about to own is, again, Middle East policy more broadly. The president announced this week that he's going to go to Israel in March. You were there when the announcement came. What was the reaction, and what is the trip really about? And we were hearing from the White House, they don't really expect this to be the sign that the president is going to have a new peace plan on the table. It seems like it's largely about mending fences with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
I think it probably is about mending fences. And in fact, I've never seen lower expectations. As soon as the announcement was made, it's like nothing's really going to happen. We're never going to get there. If you talk to people on the street, and there's some people I've known there for 25 years who said, you know, nothing will happen, nothing ever has. And usually you get a little bit of a spark. Oh, the president is coming. Isn't that great? People were talking to me about, I said, oh, you know, the president's coming. What do you think? And they said, oh, the traffic is going to be terrible.
It's like New York City.
UNGA.
So that's where the expectations are on that. But I do think he needs to mend some fences with Netanyahu. It's time that the president engaged over there.
And in part because, you know, we still have this issue, Congressman Ellison, of the coming confrontation with Iran. You got two different messages from the Iranian leaders this week. The supreme leader says no direct talks. President Ahmadinejad today maybe said he might be open to it.
But see, I think on that score, the president can't be criticized for not being in support of trying to make sure that Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon. What I hope happens is that the president raises issues around settlement expansion. I'm very concerned
West
about.
Bank.
Yeah, I mean, bottom line is, after the UN vote, where the UN voted 138-9 to recognize Palestine as a state, there was housing settlements announced the next day, which was disappointing to me, in areas that were thought to be part of the Palestinian state. So I hope after the president leaves this time that there's no such announcement or nothing embarrassing happens.
Although I would be surprised if the president made a huge issue of that as he steps foot on Israeli soil.
Look, I think that they're viewing this trip as, it's our most important ally in the region. The president hasn't been there yet. It's an important trip. It's an important way for him to engage directly with the Israeli people, first and foremost. So I think that's through the lens through which they're looking at this trip. Whether expectations are low on the ground, keeping them lower is always a good thing.
His new team should be in place by then. Secretary Kerry started this week. Secretary of State Kerry, Senator Hagel, still waiting for his confirmation up in the Senate. And I was struck last night, you were talking about Dick Cheney earlier. Dick Cheney giving a speech last night in Wyoming where he really took off on the president's appointments. Let me put it up here right now. He said that the performance now of Barack Obama as he staffs up the national security team for the second term is dismal. Frankly, what he has appointed are second-rate people. Hagel was chosen because Obama wants to have a Republican that he can use to take the heat for what he plans to do to the Department of Defense. There is an unbowed Dick Cheney.
Well, listen, Senator Hagel didn't do his new boss, President Obama, any favors by looking befuddled and confused and totally clueless about what exactly the Department of Defense does, an agency where he's up to now run. So I don't think Senator Hagel did himself any favors, or the president. But I think that when you look at how Republicans have sort of stood back, and I think given the president a lot of running room in foreign policy, it was because of a belief that Secretary Clinton, Secretary Gates were incredibly competent and incredibly reasonable and really quite measured in their foreign policy worldview. There's trepidation that the coalition of Senator Kerry, Senator Hagel, and a sort of renewed former Senator Biden are going to have a much more left-leaning foreign policy.
Senator Kerry approved overwhelmingly, but speak to this issue of Senator Hagel right now. The White House was not trying to defend his performance before the committee, but they're still pretty confident he's going to get confirmed.
Well, look, first,
and I love that Stephanie Cutter has to defend Senator Hagel. And Jay Carney, who was a White House correspondent during the Bush years, covering Senator Hagel. It makes me so happy. This is my karma. So let's hear it. Defend Hagel. I love
that right now that I can't say. Look, first of all, let me address Dick Cheney. I think the worst thing that we could do right now is take Dick Cheney's advice on foreign policy. So that's number one. Number two, John Kerry comes to this job with so much experience, life experience, both on the job as the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee. He has been an ambassador all over this world on behalf of President Obama, bringing, conflicts on the ground to an end and representing this country in a strong way, a balanced way, and a diplomatic way. And I think that, his becoming Secretary of State is a sign of strength for this administration and is being celebrated all over the world.
Senator Hagel?
Senator Hagel.
Sorry.
No. Now, putting aside his performance at a committee hearing, which will have nothing to do with how he performs his job as Secretary of Defense, he also comes to this position with significant experience, both as an enlisted man, as a senator, and has strong support across the board in being able to do this job, including from Republicans. What happened that day in the hearing, putting aside his performance, there was a lot of grudges being settled, a lot of personal conflicts being worked out, had very little to do with current foreign policy. For God's sakes, Afghanistan was barely even mentioned. It was all about the surge in Iraq. That is dealing with old wounds and not
Stephanie
something
needs
that we
to come
need
back and be Hagel's communications
director.
She's got to lead.
You know what? I'm afraid.
Republicans have served admirably in the Obama administration. LaHood, Gates, Hagel.
Absolutely.
We're trying to do the right thing for the country, not score political.
I'm a big
We're
fan
out of time.
Gates.
I just want anybody think he's not going to get confirmed?
He's going
to be confirmed, absolutely.
Thank you all very much. It was a great roundtable. Stephanie's going to stick around to answer your Facebook questions for this week's Web Extra.